I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old Oscar Countdown, a weekly Oscar show where I predict what I think will get nominated for the 2025 Oscars by breaking down each and every single category, doing a deep dive of a lot of the above-the-line ones here, like Best Director, but later on we'll be talking about screenplay categories, but also international film and editing, and really doing a deep dive into everything to help you ultimately make your predictions. If you're new to this channel, welcome, subscribe, because not only do we do those kind of weekly videos Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern, but also as we go along into the season, there's going to be predictions on a Thursday or reactions on a Tuesday. And, with the Oscar shortlist coming up and the Golden Globes and then Critics' Choice and then all the Guild Awards, we're going to be covering all of that on this channel, so you don't want to miss anything. And as always, I love to hear your guys' comments down below. That's the reason why I make these videos, is to hear your thoughts, is to build a great, awesome, Oscar-loving film community. And you guys have been awesome at doing that, giving your thoughts, giving your predictions, going back and forth, arguing about picks and things like that. The Best Director category, I think, is ripe for that kind of conversation. This category, you can predict, I think, probably 8 or 9 people you could really realistically include within your lineup in any kind of a form or combination. I'm really only confident in 2, maybe 3 of my total picks, but I will give you my arguments as to why I went with the 5 I did, as well as some possible contenders. And as always, if you'd like, take a look at the description and you can see some timestamps, and you can jump around the video if you want to hear my thoughts on certain directors, or go back, what did Connor say about that? Things like that are always, for your convenience. But without further ado, let's jump into things, starting off with my first prediction, which is going to be Brady Corbet for The Brutalist. And he's in my first slot because I think he's the most likely to get nominated, but also I think he's probably the most likely to win at this time. It's not a slam dunk like it was earlier, this time kind of last year with Christopher Nolan and Oppenheimer. I knew he was going to win. This is definitely maybe Baker, maybe it's Corbet, but having seen The Brutalist, I do think that Corbet has the edge. This is kind of like a Christopher Nolan Oppenheimer situation where it's a 3-hour-long epic. Feels like a biopic, even though it's not based on, or it's based on maybe someone in real life, but it's not actually a true story of someone's life. Yet it feels like that in every sense of the being. Adrian Brody playing Laszlo Toth, giving an incredible performance, and really, I think Brady Corbett's going to be celebrated for, kind of like Nolan with Oppenheimer, having great above-the-line performances and also having a lot of great technical craft. We usually see, whether it be Jane Campion in The Power of the Dog, or even some like Alfonso Cuarón for Roma, the movies that usually have the most amount of nominations, or that have nominations in the technical categories but also in the acting categories, it just tells us that there's wide support for the movie. So usually that kind of is funneled back up to the director. And what I think the director's branch also really appreciates is a sense of authorship and a sense of uniqueness, and that only one person could have made this movie. And The Brutalist, I think, is of that ilk. Some people compare it to like The Godfather, or There Will Be Blood, or The Master was the movie that kind of jumped up to mind for me when I first saw it. But it really is kind of a singular, unique kind of a movie. The first half, very different from the second half. Plays around with form quite a bit, has kind of painterly long takes at times, and these kind of wide shots, which are very beautiful. I think a lot of the directors will appreciate the fact that he made this movie for such little money, and made it look so good for that amount of money. And then I think also people will appreciate the fact that this movie was shot on 70mm film. We know the director's branch in particular have always been celebratory of the theatrical experience, or shooting things on film. That's kind of the film nerd in them that they love. The kind of old school, the details, because I think a lot of everyone's dream in the director's branch is probably to shoot on 70mm film, and Brady Corbet was able to do it for such a small budget and for this movie. So I think there's that kind of added benefit there where the directors will definitely appreciate it. And then I think, The Brutalist is one of the movies that's contending to potentially even win Best Picture. So this is definitely a pretty solid chance of getting nominated. And I think Brady has a good shot just because of how visually interesting the movie is and how much it is absolutely a Brady Corbet movie. And that people will appreciate it and maybe ultimately give him the win. Then in my second slot, I'm going to go with Sean Baker for Anora. And like Brady Corbet with The Brutalist, I think Anora is absolutely a Sean Baker movie. If you've seen his other movies, he tackles a similar kind of themes and energy style as well. The reason why I have Berger in the second place, even though I think Anora is actually a stronger chance to win Best Picture as compared to The Brutalist, is because when I think you walk out of Anora, you think of more so the story and the characters, and maybe less so of the director. When we're talking about winners, we're talking about people who have kind of clear, bold, think of like auteurship visions of when you see a Wes Anderson movie, you know that's a Wes Anderson movie. In the same way, even something like a Christopher Nolan, I think you would understand it's a Nolan movie. There's a sense of kind of control where the director is the main force of the movie. But when you walk out of Anora, I think you think of the amazing characters and the amazing story, and more so the dialogue and the writing, less so of the directing, just because Baker's not experimenting with the form as much as The Brutalist is. The Brutalist is a little bit more noticeable, I guess, in its directing, and sometimes I think that may push it over the edge. Just ask Quentin Tarantino or Woody Allen or Noah Baumbach. These are all great writer-directors who always get nominated for directing when their movies are well-liked, but they never win for directing. They win in the screenplay categories because they're seen mostly as writer-directors rather than director-writers. I think Berger is more into the Tarantino branch rather than he is the Nolan branch, where I think people think of Nolan first as a director and second as a writer, whereas I think maybe people think of Berger more so, particularly with his films, of the themes, the social commentary, the dialogue, the energy, the amazing characters that he has. All great things, but they're just not as bold and obvious, particularly with his directorial choices, as someone like a Brady Corbet for The Brutalist. But regardless, it is still a very unique, singular Sean Berger movie, and Anora, I think, is a front runner to win for Best Picture. And I do think it's bold enough. It's not like a Green Book, for example, where the directing is maybe a little bit more invisible and takes a back seat. Berger still does, some flashy stuff within his movie, enough to make it kind of, I think, guarantee Berger a nomination. Then in my third slot, I'm going to go with Jacques Audiard for Emilia, Pérez. And every year in the 2020s, we have had an international director get nominated in the Best Director category. It is the biggest shift in modern Oscars history that we've seen in any category. That is, international directors have becoming more and more likely to be recognized in the modern Academy. When the Academy, about 10 years or so, really expanded its efforts to become a more international organization and invited more international members, they invited a lot of international directors, and because the directors branch of the Academy votes on who the best directors will be nominated at the Oscars, they kind of exert a lot of influence. And we've seen this. Surprises like Thomas Vinterberg for Another Round or Pavel Pawlikowski for Cold War back in 2018. Movies where the director gets nominated and the movie doesn't even get nominated for Best Picture. So when you're making your predictions, I think you have to almost always now slot in at least one international director, one French or, Danish or whoever it is, Polish auteur that you want to kind of slot in, not from North America. And I wouldn't even consider like England, really. Maybe you could consider that. Hard to exactly say, but usually the movie is as well is in another language, and that's kind of the best way to think about things. And for me this year, that is Jacques Audiard, because he's got on paper everything going for him. First of all, the movie is well liked. I expect it to get nominated for Best Picture, so of course that always helps. Check. The second thing, he's got a strong directorial vision and authorship with this movie. It is absolutely a Jacques Audiard movie. It's a musical, but it's also a cartel movie, but it's also a social justice movie. It's totally unique. It's totally his own. People think about that. They think of the uniqueness of the director, what they're able to bring. Check. And that's a Jacques Audiard movie. So well-liked directorial vision. And then, of course, he's an international auteur. He is someone who's been making movies for many years now. He won the Palme d'Or, not with this movie, but with a previous movie of his. So, he's well respected within European circles. The movie, for the most part, is not in English. It's in Spanish. So there's that kind of, once again, international factor. And we know the movie is going to be seen because it's being distributed in the States by Netflix. So it's going to be well seen by many Academy voters. So I'm actually really confident that Jacques Audiard gets nominated here. I think some people actually have left him out of their predictions. I've seen the movie. It is a bold, interesting movie. I think it's bold enough and unique enough that people will want to reward the director. I think Jacques Audiard has a lot of respect as an international auteur, and we see these international auteurs get nominated here in this category. So I think this year that definitely is Jacques Audiard. Then in my fourth slot, I went with Denis Villeneuve for Dune Part 2. And these last two slots were pretty tricky. Confident in my top two, pretty confident in my third pick. These next two picks you could swap and mix out a bunch of different options, but I'm going to tell you why I went with these two that I picked. The first one here in the fourth slot being Denis Villeneuve for Dune Part 2. And that is because I'm banking on the fact that Denis Villeneuve has been nominated before. Well, why does that matter? Because we have not had a category, the Best Director category, where all 5 of the nominees were first-time nominees. It's never happened since 1997. It has never happened in the 21st century where all 5 of the Best Directing nominees were never nominated before. That is to say, they were first-time nominees. There's always a Steven Spielberg that gets nominated, or a Martin Scorsese, or Clint Eastwood. There's always someone who gets nominated in the 4th, 5th slot that's been nominated before. Now, this could be a rule that absolutely could be broken. We've had many years where only one of the 5 nominees had been a previous nominee. But it does help us some years as to understand which movies will get nominated. If you remember in 2016, the 5th slot was kind of up in the air. It ultimately went to Mel Gibson for Hacksaw Ridge. He'd been nominated before, well-liked director, so they put him in. Same thing in 2017. We weren't sure what that 5th slot was going to be. It went to Paul Thomas Anderson for Phantom Thread because he was a past nominee, well-respected, director, auteur, and he got in that final slot. So I felt uncomfortable for the fact that this is a 20-plus year stat. We don't really have those stats in the Oscars. They're pretty rare to have that go on for so long. 1997, a long time ago now. So I'm going to bank on that. I'm going to bank the fact that Denis Villeneuve is a celebrated auteur, well-respected. I think people really consider the Dune franchise more so his franchise than Warner Brothers franchise. It's not like he's doing IP work. This is really his own that he's created and crafted in his own image. He also wrote the movie, which is important, and we'll talk about a little bit later. I expect the movie to get nominated for Best Picture. I expect the movie to get a lot of technical awards. My concern, of course, is that it was released so earlier in the year. Will still people kind of consider it and want to reward it and celebrate it? But I do think that Denis Villeneuve, who has been snubbed, for example, like the first Dune movie, there's a possibility for that there, but I'm betting on the fact that in a year where there's a bunch of first-time nominees, they're going to want to put in one of their own, one of their favorites that they've nominated before, and give Denis the nomination. Then in my 5th slot, I went with Ramell Ross for Nickel Boys. And this is a movie that I saw recently in an advanced screening, so had the pleasure of seeing it. And that really had a big influence on why I decided to include Ramell in this category, because once you see the movie, you understand how formally ambitious and daring it is. So a very slight spoiler of the movie in terms of how it's shot, if you don't want to hear anything, skip ahead of this portion of the video. But it is shot mostly in the first person, in a first person POV. So it's almost as if you're inside the mind of someone, so you see everything they're saying, they move around. It almost feels like VR or a video game at times. And when you watch the movie and how it's filmed that way, you just immediately start asking a lot of questions. And immediately the director and the director's choices you start to think about, and it puts you in that kind of that mindset. Oh, are the actors wearing it? What are they wearing? Are they wearing a rig? How do they decide to do things? Why from this perspective? How they kind of, change that form and play around with it later on with almost a disassociated POV. There is a lot of kind of playing around with this form to ultimately tell the story in the best way possible that I think people, particularly directors, will have a lot of questions about and want to learn more about. So because it's so formally ambitious and daring, because of that unique choice to set it in kind of the POV perspective, I think directors will really respect that kind of new way of telling a story and kind of innovation in that sense. And I think people respect the fact that this movie was made within the studio system at MGM and how Ramell Ross was able to almost do this experiment within the studio system. I also think that this is going to be a critics kind of a movie, like The Zone of Interest or Drive My Car, where maybe gets an acting nomination, but more so it's well appreciated by the critics as one of the best movies of the year for being so kind of formally inventive and daring. And if it picks up a lot of kind of LA Film Critics Circle or New York Film Critics Circle, a lot of those critics prizes, it could help, Academy members, particularly directors, to be a little bit more aware of Ramell and his movie. I also think this movie is going to get nominated for Best Picture, so I am a believer in this movie as a contender. And after seeing the movie, even more so, I think they can definitely, be as long as it's seen. That's my big concern. Is MGM doesn't always campaign things the best sometimes, but they've gotten American Fiction, and they do have, of course, Amazon, which they're a part of in terms of distributing the movie, so it will be seen ultimately. But the other really big thing that gave me confidence to put Ramell Ross in this category is that in the last 5 years, there have only been 4 directors who didn't write their own movie. So think about that. 25 nominees, only 4 did not write their own movie. That means there's an average of 4.2 out of 5 every year for the past 5 years, where the director also directed the movie, but they also wrote the movie or co-wrote the movie. And I think that's a strong indicator that when people think of directors, they think of writers as well. They wrote the movie, they directed the movie, it's their movie. It's not someone directing a script of someone else, it is their own movie. And who are those 4 people that got nominated that didn't write their own movie? Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, David Fincher, and Yorgos Lanthimos. 4 legends. I mean, without Lanthimos, you'd say Fincher, Scorsese, Spielberg. Those are some of the best directors of all time. They are so well respected that, okay, we'll allow a nomination even though you didn't write your own movie, because you know what a Spielberg movie looks like. You know what even a Yorgos Lanthimos movie looks like. They're so interesting and dynamic visually with their directorial style that you still think of it as a Yorgos Lanthimos movie. But for some of the other directors, I think, if Jordan Peele didn't write Get Out, would he get nominated for director as well? I don't know, because maybe it would be seen as like a job for hire, and directors didn't respect it as much. I think directors do appreciate someone who writes their own material and brings it forward and nominates it. So that is absolutely a benefit for someone like a Ramell Ross, but also it's a reason why I didn't go in this final slot for, let's say, Ridley Scott for Gladiator 2. He didn't write the movie. In the same way, I didn't go with Edward Berger for Conclave. Now, if Ridley Scott gets nominated, I wouldn't be too surprised just because he is of that level of a Scorsese, of a Spielberg. But frankly, 4.2 out of 5 is the average of directors who also wrote their own movies in this category. I'm not betting against that. Ramell Ross also co-wrote this movie as well as directing it, and I think that will help him push him over the edge. Now, talking about some possible contenders. My first one is Mohammad Rasoulof for The Seed of the Sacred Fig, and I left this out because I didn't want to put too much of a reliance on international directors. This could absolutely be a situation like a Ryusuke Hamaguchi, for example, for Drive My Car, where the movie sneaks in for picture and also gets in for director, and then maybe, a screenplay prize and an international feature. That's absolutely a clear, path that I could go towards. But for the most part, when we talk about these international directors, we only have one a year. Last year we had 2, but I think more so that was due to the fact that Anatomy of a Fall and The Zone of Interest were really well-liked movies and were kind of guaranteed to get nominated for Best Picture. So we already have an international director in my slot of Jacques Audiard. Also, when we talk about the directors that did get nominated, Fincherberg, Pawlikowski, even Ruben Östlund, these were well-established auteurs who had made other movies that were really well critically acclaimed. I knew who Ruben Östlund was. I knew who Paweł Pawlikowski was before they got nominated. I had seen some of their other movies and liked them a lot. Maybe this is a bias towards me, but Mohammad Rasoulof, I haven't really heard too much about. I haven't seen too many of his other movies. They weren't as well celebrated. Ruben Östlund, when he got nominated, he already won his second Palme d'Or at that point. Mohammad Rasoulof, is still more of a newer director in the sense that his other movies were as well established or critically acclaimed as some of the other directors we're talking about, like a Jonathan Glazer, which is why maybe I would compare him more so to a Ryusuke Hamaguchi, because similar with Hamaguchi, I don't think he was of that kind of level on the international stage until Drive My Car. So that's why I have him kind of on the outside. I don't think the movie's going to get nominated for Best Picture. I don't want to put 2 international directors in because we usually only get 1. And then I guess, but the positives are that he's got a great story. He's an Iranian director who shot the movie in Iran, but did not direct the movie actually in the country of Iran. He had to do it kind of remotely through proxy because he has a warrant out for his arrest in Iran, so he has to be kind of living in exile. It's a crazy story, the fact that he directed this movie, but he wasn't actually there, and it was a real kind of, I think, sign of rebellion from his point of view and his perspective. And I think the directors will really appreciate that incredible story, and then appreciate kind of the drama transition into crime, kind of the element of the story that's very unique. So definitely a possible contender if this movie gets nominated for picture and then he maybe eventually gets in for director. I could absolutely see that happening, but right now I'm not predicting it. And then in my final slot, I went with Edward Berger for Conclave. This is a movie that I expect to get nominated for Best Picture, but I don't think it's as flashy in its directing. I think of it more so as, like a Green Book or a Coda. There is some, I think, very subtle things going on here where he's great with the insert shot. He's great. His production design is really fantastic. Some of the quieter, smaller moments are also really well done. So it's an excellently directed movie, in my opinion, but it's not as flashy. And we see movies that are well liked, like Green Book or Coda or Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. A lot of those directors, just don't get nominated for director because the focus of those stories are more so the script and the characters and the story, and the directing doesn't always want to get in the way of that and be so flashy, and as a result, they don't always get appreciated. And then I think the nail in the coffin for me was also the fact that Berger did not write this movie, so were I to put him in, he would be the fifth of, let's say 30 or so people that get nominated and that didn't also write their own movie. So I would be putting Edward Berger in the same class as Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg. I don't think he's that well respected enough. And I also think a movie like All Quiet on the Western Front was maybe more of a well-liked movie than Conclave in terms of the Oscars. And he didn't get nominated for that movie either. So I just don't think the Academy sees him as this kind of international auteur necessarily. And even some of his jobs that we're looking at on forward in terms of what he may direct, he's leaning more so into Hollywood rather than doing more international European art house type projects. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts as to who you think will get nominated and your thoughts on this video. As always, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our videos, but we will always have one Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.